It happened on a quiet Sunday morning while I was repotting my orchids in the greenhouse. The smell of damp soil and fertilizer always calmed me down. I was humming softly when my granddaughter Lily rushed in holding her phone like it was burning her hand. "Grandpa," she said, breathless, "Mom just texted me. She and Dad are in Panama." I looked up, wiping the soil off my palms. "Panama?" I repeated. She nodded, showing me the screen. The message was short and cruelly casual. "We're off to Panama, took the trust money. We'll send pictures from the beach." I smiled. Lily blinked in disbelief. "Grandpa, did you hear me? They took everything. The trust, the accounts." I leaned back against the bench, watching sunlight stream through the greenhouse glass. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "They took what they thought was everything." What Lily didn't know, and what her mother would soon learn, was that I had already moved the entire trust the day before. Da Paria. 3 months earlier, the warning signs began. It started with subtle comments during Sunday dinners. My son's wife, Amelia, began talking more about financial independence and how outdated our family's structure was. She'd stir her tea slowly, her tone casual but sharp. "Harry," she'd say, "don't you think it's time to let the younger generation manage things? You've done your part." I'd nod and smile. "Perhaps," I'd say. "But managing money isn't about age, it's about discipline." My son Daniel usually stayed quiet. He wasn't a bad man, just weak. He wanted peace, and Amelia knew exactly how to weaponize that. As the months passed, Amelia grew bolder. She started visiting the accountant on her own, claiming she was helping Dad with paperwork. I knew better. I'd seen this story before. Greed always enters with a smile. One evening I caught a glimpse of her whispering to Daniel in the hallway. Her tone was urgent. When she saw me, she froze for a split second, then plastered on her perfect smile. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Of course, Dad," Daniel said quickly. "Just talking about travel plans." Travel plans. The phrase would come back later like a bad omen. By midsummer, Amelia was practically managing every conversation about the trust. She talked about investments, tax shelters, even offshore accounts. I could see her mind building castles on sand. And then, one night, I overheard her saying the line that sealed her fate. "He's old, Danny. He won't even notice until it's done." That was the night I called my attorney. I didn't argue, didn't accuse, didn't warn. I simply transferred the entire trust into a separate account under my granddaughter's name, with legal safeguards no one could touch. The next morning, I brought Lily a small orchid plant. "For you," I said. "It'll need care, patience, and honesty, just like family money." She smiled, not understanding the double meaning. The day before Amelia's Panama announcement, she walked into the study with Daniel and said they'd decided to take a little time off. Her voice trembled with fake sincerity. "We'll only be gone for a few weeks," she said. "You can handle things here, right?" I looked at her. "I always do." That night they packed their bags. They left at dawn, believing they'd fooled an old man. The next day, when Lily read that message aloud, "We're off to Panama, took the trust money," I simply smiled again, because what Amelia didn't know was that the trust had already been rewritten, sealed, and protected. And soon enough, Panama would teach her that stolen money doesn't buy peace, it just rents time. Lily didn't speak for a long time after I told her the trust was safe. She just stood there, staring at me like I'd revealed the ending to a story she didn't know she was in. "Wait," she finally said, "you moved it before they took it?" I nodded, brushing a bit of soil from my sleeve. "A day before, to be exact. Call it instinct or experience." She frowned. "But why didn't you tell Dad or anyone?" I smiled softly. "Because, sweetheart, sometimes silence teaches louder than confrontation." She sat beside me on the greenhouse bench, sunlight touching her face. She looked so much like her father when he was young, hopeful, confused, and too kind for his own good. I handed her the watering can. "Pour a little around the base, not the leaves," I said. "Roots need strength before flowers appear." As she watered, I told her everything. 3 weeks before the Panama flight, I'd been to the attorney's office. My lawyer, Margaret, was a sharp woman. Kind eyes, but a spine of steel. She'd handled the family's finances for decades. When I explained the situation, she didn't look surprised. "Greed rarely hides well, Harry," she said. "They think they're being clever, but they always leave a trail." We spent that entire afternoon drafting what I called the second trust, a parallel structure, airtight and invisible to anyone outside my signature. The original trust would remain visible, bait for those too arrogant to look deeper. Margaret grinned when we were done. "So they'll think they're taking millions," she said. "And in truth," I replied, "they'll only be taking a pile of zeros and a lesson in humility." The documents were notarized that evening. I left the office lighter than I'd felt in months. In the following days, I watched Amelia more carefully. She started spending more time on her laptop, whispering on phone calls that ended whenever I walked into the room. She even convinced Daniel to take out small personal loans for travel logistics. They thought I didn't notice. But every move they made confirmed what I already knew. They were preparing to flee with the trust. That's when I began preparing Lily. It started small. I'd invite her to the greenhouse more often. We'd talk about plants, responsibility, and legacy. She thought it was just my usual old man wisdom, but every lesson was a quiet metaphor. "When you prune a diseased branch," I told her once, trimming an orchid stem, "it hurts the plant for a while, but it's the only way the rest can bloom again." She nodded, not realizing I was talking about her mother. Now sitting beside me after the Panama message, she finally began to understand. "So the new trust," she said slowly, "it's under my name?" "Yes. Legally, you're the guardian of what's left of this family's legacy. But don't let that scare you. It's not just money. It's a responsibility to rebuild what greed tried to destroy." Her eyes widened. "Mom doesn't know?" "She'll know soon," I said calmly. "Life has a way of sending receipts." Dapari. 2 weeks passed. Lily helped me in the greenhouse each morning before school. I could tell she was processing everything in silence. Sometimes she'd stop mid-task and just whisper, "I still can't believe they did that." I didn't blame her. When betrayal comes from your own blood, it doesn't feel like a single wound. It's a slow leak of trust. Then one afternoon, the first sign of karma arrived. I was trimming vines when Lily burst into the yard, holding her phone again. "Grandpa, look," she said, breathless. On the screen was an email from her mother, sent at 2 a.m. "Sweetheart, we're having some issues with the bank here. Things are frozen. Can you ask Grandpa to send a small transfer just until we sort things out?" There it was, the first ripple of panic. I chuckled softly. "Frozen accounts, Sounds like paradise is getting expensive." Lily frowned. "What should I say?" "Nothing," I said. "Let her think the silence means you're processing. Let her squirm." Over the next few days, the emails became more desperate. Amelia claimed their investment had been seized, that local authorities didn't understand foreign transfers. She even tried to guilt Lily by mentioning her birthday. Every line reeked of manipulation. By the end of the week, the tone had changed from confident to pleading. "Lily, please tell Grandpa we made a mistake. We'll come home soon." I smiled when I read it. Not because I enjoyed their pain, but because for once they were facing the mirror they'd built. That night, Lily sat beside me again. She was quiet for a while before speaking. "Grandpa, are you going to forgive them?" I looked at the orchids, their roots curled deep in the soil. "Forgiveness isn't the same as trust," I said. "One you give for peace, the other you earn through change." She nodded slowly, understanding. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the love for her father, the disappointment in her mother. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You can love someone and still hold them accountable, Lily. That's how real love works." 2 more weeks later, the inevitable happened. They came back, not to the house, at least not yet, but to the country. I got a call from Margaret. "They've returned, Harry. Bank statements show they're broke. Completely." I thanked her and hung up. When I told Lily, she didn't celebrate. She just whispered, "So what happens now?" I smiled gently. "Now, sweetheart, we let them come home. Let them walk through that door thinking I'll be the fool they left behind." I turned off the greenhouse lights, watching the soft glow fade from the glass panels. "Tomorrow," I said, "the roots face the storm." They showed up on a Thursday evening, unannounced but expected. I was in the living room reading the paper when the sound of the front gate creaked open. Through the window, I saw Daniel's car pull up. The paint was dull, the tires worn, and their faces, once smug and glowing with tropical arrogance, were pale and hollow. Amelia stepped out first. She was thinner than I remembered, her hair pulled back tightly, the confidence in her stride replaced with nervous energy. Daniel followed, carrying 2 suitcases and the weight of quiet regret. They looked like people who'd spent all their luck and were now begging the universe for a refund. Lily appeared beside me, holding the edge of the curtain. "They're here," she whispered. Her tone wasn't angry, just sad. I nodded and stood, smoothing out my shirt. "Then let's be polite hosts, shall we?" The doorbell rang. I waited just long enough for discomfort to settle in before opening it. "Dad," Daniel said, forcing a small smile. We're back." "So I see," I said. "You look well fed for people who were starving." Amelia flinched but recovered with a brittle laugh. "It's been difficult, Harry. Panama didn't turn out the way we hoped." "Paradise rarely does," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." They entered slowly, eyes darting around like strangers in a familiar place. Lily hovered near the hallway, unsure whether to hug her father or stay distant. Daniel reached for her, but she froze. The air turned heavy. I gestured toward the dining table. "Sit, you must be hungry." Amelia hesitated but obeyed. Her gaze flicked toward the family portraits on the wall, the same ones she'd once called old and depressing. Now they looked like ghosts watching her every move. I poured tea, my hands steady. "So," I began calmly, "tell me, how was Panama?" Daniel sighed. "A disaster. The banks froze our accounts. The people we invested with turned out to be scammers. We lost everything." I took a slow sip. "Everything?" He nodded miserably. "We thought we were taking what was ours, but the transfer didn't go through like we planned. When we tried to withdraw, the accounts were empty." Amelia jumped in, voice trembling. "Harry, please, we made mistakes, but we didn't mean for it to go this far. We thought—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We thought the trust was just sitting there, wasting away. We thought we could make more of it." I met her eyes. "Make more of it? You mean steal it?" "Borrow," she snapped, then immediately softened. "We were going to put it back once the investment paid off, but everything fell apart." Lily's voice cut in from the doorway, soft but sharp. "You didn't plan to come back." Amelia turned, startled. "Lily, sweetheart, that's not true." "It is," Lily said, her eyes glistening. "You texted me like it was a joke. You said we took the trust money with a winking emoji. You weren't sorry then." The silence that followed was brutal. Daniel dropped his head into his hands. Amelia's voice cracked. "We were wrong. I see that now." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Wrong doesn't begin to cover it, Amelia. You didn't just betray a trust fund. You betrayed trust itself." She looked at me desperately. "We just need a chance to start over." I studied her face. There was no arrogance left, only panic and shame. For a brief second I saw the young woman she once was, ambitious, hopeful, before greed hollowed her out. Finally I stood. "Start over," I repeated softly. "You'll get your chance, but not here, not with what isn't yours." Daniel looked up, confusion in his eyes. "What do you mean?" I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out a brown envelope. Inside were the legal papers from Margaret, the new trust, the updated beneficiary list, everything that sealed their fate. I placed it on the table. "The family trust was rewritten months ago. You never had access to it. What you stole was an empty shell. I let you take it." Amelia blinked. "You let us?" "Yes," I said. "I wanted you to see what easy money does to a soul. You thought you were clever, but all you took was air. The real trust is under Lily's guardianship now." Lily gasped. Daniel's face turned ashen. "Dad, you gave it to her?" "I did," I said firmly, "because she's the only one in this house who understands value without greed." Amelia stood up suddenly, anger flashing through the shame. "You had no right." I met her glare. "You had no right to steal from your own family. Don't talk to me about rights." The room fell silent again, thick with everything left unsaid. Daniel reached for Amelia's hand, but she pulled away. She was trembling, not from anger now, but from the cold realization that her empire of lies had collapsed. I sighed and walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the yard in gold. "You know," I said quietly, "Panama wasn't your punishment. This is." They both looked at me. "Living with the knowledge that you destroyed the trust of your family, that's a heavier sentence than any court could give." Daniel tried to speak, but no words came. Amelia wiped her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "So that's it? We just leave?" "No," I said. "You go rebuild yourselves." Earn what you lost the right to inherit. If you can do that, if you learn what money can't buy, then maybe there'll be something waiting for you in the next will." Lily was crying silently. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Show them the door, sweetheart." As they left, Amelia turned one last time. "Harry, I'm sorry." I nodded. "Then prove it." When the door closed, the house felt lighter. I walked back to the greenhouse where the orchids glowed in the dim evening light. Lily followed me quietly. "They'll be okay," she said softly. "Maybe," I replied, "if they learn that roots, not wings, keep a family alive." She smiled faintly. "You really planned all of this?" "Not planned," I said, touching a blooming orchid. "Prepared. Because when greed storms the garden, only the ones with deep roots survive." The next morning, the house was quiet again. For the first time in months, there was no tension humming in the walls, no whispered arguments echoing down the hallways. Just sunlight filtering through the curtains and the faint hum of the kettle boiling in the kitchen. Lily joined me at the table, still wearing the same expression she'd had since last night, a mix of relief and sorrow. "Do you think they'll be okay?" she asked. I stirred my tea. "That depends on whether they choose to heal or to blame. Some people rebuild after losing everything. Others spend the rest of their lives pretending it wasn't their fault." She nodded slowly, tracing circles on the table with her fingertip. I could tell her heart was heavy. No matter what Amelia had done, she was still Lily's mother. Love doesn't vanish just because someone breaks it. It lingers like a scar that keeps reminding you of what used to be whole. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you tell me sooner? About the trust, I mean, about the plan." I smiled softly. "Because if I had, you'd have worried. And worry doesn't protect, it only burdens the heart. I needed you to see what patience looks like. You can't rush justice. It needs time to ripen." She thought about that, then sighed. "You sound like your orchids." I chuckled. Maybe they've been teaching me. A few days later, Margaret came over. She was carrying her briefcase and that knowing smile of hers. "Quite the turn of events," she said as we settled in the study. "Word travels fast, even in quiet neighborhoods. I take it they didn't handle the news well." I shook my head. "Shock and shame, nothing violent, thankfully." Margaret adjusted her glasses. "You did the right thing, Harry. That trust wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. You protected that." Lily, who was sitting on the couch, looked up. "Legacy?" Margaret smiled at her. "Your grandfather's built this family through decades of work and sacrifice. A trust fund isn't a reward. It's a responsibility to carry that legacy forward." Lily nodded, absorbing every word. I leaned back in my chair. "That's why the new trust has conditions," I said. "It's not meant to spoil anyone, it's meant to teach." Margaret opened the folder and slid a document toward Lily. "You're the guardian now. You'll oversee all allocations, with your grandfather's approval until you come of age. Every withdrawal requires a reason, and every investment must serve the family." Lily looked overwhelmed. "That's a lot." I smiled. "So is love, so is duty." She reached out and took the pen, her hand trembling slightly as she signed the acknowledgement form. When she finished, she looked up at me with eyes full of quiet determination. "I won't let you down, Grandpa." "I know you won't," I said, "because you've already learned the hardest part, how to see greed for what it really is." Later that afternoon, we took a walk through the garden. The orchids were blooming beautifully, their colors vivid against the soft green of the leaves. Lily stopped beside one of the white ones and touched the petal gently. "You said roots survive storms. Does that mean you think Mom and Dad still have a chance?" I looked at the flowers, remembering all the storms they'd endured. "Maybe," I said. "If they're willing to start from the ground again, some roots can regrow, even after being torn out." She smiled faintly. "You always talk in plant metaphors." "It's easier than talking about people," I said with a grin. "Plants don't lie." She laughed quietly, the sound easing the last bit of tension between us. A week passed. Then one morning an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name written in Daniel's shaky handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a short letter. "Dad, so I don't expect forgiveness. We've been staying in a small motel outside town, trying to find work. Amelia's been quiet. She keeps saying she wants to make things right. I know I let you down. I let myself be led by weakness. I thought keeping peace meant giving in, but I see now it only created war. If you'll let us, we'd like to visit again. Not for money, just to apologize properly. Love, Daniel. I folded the letter carefully and handed it to Lily. She read it in silence, then looked up at me. Are you going to let them come? Not yet, I said. They need to live the apology first, not just write it. Words are cheap. Change is the real currency. She nodded thoughtfully. I get it. You want them to grow roots before they come back. I smiled. Exactly. That evening I sat in the greenhouse again. The light was warm, the air thick with the scent of soil and new growth. Lily was reading nearby, her presence steady and comforting. I spoke softly, almost to myself. You know, I used to think the family trust was my greatest accomplishment, but I was wrong. It's not the money or the land or the shares. It's the people who survive it, the ones who don't let it poison them. Lily closed her book and smiled. Then I guess I'm your favorite flower. I laughed, a sound full of pride. You always were. Outside, the wind rustled through the garden, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace, not the fragile kind that breaks with every argument, but the deep, quiet peace that comes after a storm. The family was cracked but not broken. The trust had been saved, but more importantly, the lesson had been planted. And as I looked at Lily, strong, kind, uncorrupted, I knew the family legacy was in good hands. Because in the end, it wasn't about protecting money. It was about protecting what kind of people would carry it forward. 2 months later, autumn settled over the town. The air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves, and the greenhouse shimmered with gold and amber light. My orchids had never looked better, almost as if they too had found relief in the quiet that followed the storm. Lily had changed. She carried herself differently now, calmer, wiser, with a quiet strength that reminded me of her grandmother. She handled the trust's paperwork every weekend, learning from Margaret, asking careful questions, and taking notes like a young professional. Watching her filled me with a pride words couldn't describe. One evening, while we were closing the greenhouse, Lily said, "Grandpa, I heard from Dad again." I looked up. "And?" She hesitated. "He's found work. A mechanic shop downtown, Mom's helping at a bakery. He says they're doing better, and that they don't expect anything from us." I nodded slowly, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. That's good. It means they're finally growing roots instead of wings. She smiled faintly. He also said Mom's been visiting a counselor, trying to change. For a moment, silence lingered between us, heavy with hope and doubt. Then I said softly, "People can change, Lily, but change that lasts doesn't come from guilt. It comes from understanding the pain you caused." She looked thoughtful. "Would you ever forgive them?" I leaned against the potting table, wiping soil from my hands. "Forgiveness isn't a door you open all at once. It's a window you crack open when the air feels right. Maybe one day, when I see real peace in their eyes, that window will open." She nodded, accepting that. A week later, the family gathered for the first time since the fallout. Not everyone, just a few cousins, neighbors, and Margaret. We had dinner in the garden under soft lights. I noticed Lily glancing toward the empty chairs where her parents used to sit. After dessert, she whispered, "I wish they were here." "Someday," I said gently, "but not tonight. Tonight is for the people who stayed." I raised a glass. To roots, not riches, and to lessons learned the hard way. Everyone laughed softly and clinked glasses. Lily smiled, her eyes shining. Later that night, when everyone had left, I stayed behind to water the orchids one last time. The moonlight filtered through the glass roof, turning the petals silver. Lily walked up beside me, holding her phone. "Grandpa," she said, "Mom texted, just 2 words, 'We're sorry.'" I took a deep breath and smiled faintly. "That's a start." She nodded, slipping her phone away. "What will you say back?" I looked at the orchids. "Nothing yet. Sometimes silence says more than words." She reached out and touched one of the flowers, its white petals glowing in the moonlight. "You know," she said quietly, "I think Mom's learning about roots too." I smiled at that. Let's hope she is. Weeks later, I found myself recording a short message for the family archive, a tradition I'd started years ago. The camera blinked red as I began to speak. "If you're watching this," I said, "then you're part of this family's story. Remember what happened when greed took over love. Remember that a fortune can be rebuilt, but trust must be earned. And remember this above all, Money doesn't build legacy. Character does. I paused, then added softly, and if you ever find yourself lost, come back to the garden. You'll find the answers where the orchids grow. I turned off the camera and sat in the quiet for a while. In the distance, I could hear Lily humming in the kitchen, her voice light and steady. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive again. Maybe one day Daniel and Amelia would walk through that door, not as thieves returning, but as family reborn. And when that day came, I'd be ready, not with judgment, but with a story. Because every garden deserves a second bloom.